I think that's an oxymoron. Young adults, 6:30 in the morning. But you were on my same thought process. I was going to announce that they had left today to go to out to San Diego to attend graduation, and so keep him in our prayers. Proud of him. He's made it all the way through, and now is a full-fledged Marine. As I mentioned, I was up in San Antonio past couple of days meeting with some investors and a couple of meetings, and I was talking with BC a little bit. These several of these individuals that I met with were very, very wealthy individuals, and reminded me of the little boy that talking to God. He said, God, he said, what's $1 million like to you? And he said, well, $1 million is like a penny to you. Little boy thought about it. He said, well, God, he says, what's a million years like to you? He says, well, it's like a second to you. And the little boy thought a little bit more, and he said, well, God, would you give me a penny? God said, yeah, give me a second. These people that I was meeting with, they were big Texas fans. Graduated from Texas sorority, sports, and reminded me of Kelly back here. And of course, Kelly played baseball and was a star shortstop on the Pan American Bronx back when they were winning all their games. And it reminded me also of there were these two baseball players that loved baseball all their life, and they were getting up in age, and they're starting to talk about heaven. And one of them asked the other, he says, "Do you think there's baseball up in heaven?" He says, "I don't know." He says, "Okay, well, we're going to make a pact." He says, "Whoever gets to heaven first is going to find out if there's baseball, and then they're going to come back and they're going to tell the other one if there's baseball up in heaven." So they made this pact in a couple of months. Unfortunately, one of them passed away and went up to heaven, and then came back down and met with his friend. He says, "I got good news and I got bad news." He says, "What's that?" He says, "There is baseball up in heaven." "Oh, great. What's the bad news?" He says, "You're scheduled to pitch next Thursday." So, we'll get into Daniel chapter 2. A couple of weeks ago, we went over Daniel chapter 1. And remember, just to kind of refresh our memory, bring us up to date, it was the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, the king of Judah. And they had taken several of the skillful people into Babylon as prisoners, as you could say, but they were able to, Jeremiah had told them, when you go in there, multiply, buy property, work, serve the Lord. And there was 3 or 4 actually that Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah that were picked from the group. And we kind of talked about how might have been the first vegetarians, because Daniel wasn't going to eat the same food that the king was eating. And of course their names were changed to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And Daniel's name was given Belteshazzar. And God showed a lot of favor and compassion to Daniel. And and Daniel actually remains, and a testament to his trust and faith in God, he actually remains as one who serves the entire 70 years that Israel is in Babylon. But in chapter 2 we get started. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. And when they came in and stood before the king, he said, "I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means." Then the astrologers answered the king, "May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it." And the king replied to the astrologers, "This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpret it, I will have to cut you into pieces, and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me." Once more they replied, "Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will interpret it." Then the king answered, "I am certain that you're trying to gain time, because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me the dream, there is only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then, tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me." The astrologers answered the king, "There's no one on earth who can do what the king asked. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologers." So the astrologers kind of had a Joe Biden moment. "Oh, come on, man, king, you know we can't interpret this. Let's be fair. No man knows what you're thinking. No man knows what you dream. No man is able to show you this." And they said, "Look, not in history has this ever happened." So in verse 11, what the king asked is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among humans. And so if we remember from previous studies, they were dealing with the wrong man, because Nebuchadnezzar was very short-tempered. And he was always becoming angry, very furious, and that was until his conversion. So this made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon in verse 13. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death as well. So we notice here the tremendous power of Nebuchadnezzar. He had the final word. His word was law, and he could order that all these men be eliminated, cut them into pieces. His word was the law. And when we get into the next empire later on in chapters 5 and 6, we get into the Medo-Persian Empire, we'll notice that when the king makes a decree and signs it, that he was subject to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which once the decree had been signed, it could not be changed. He did not have the same type of autocratic control as Nebuchadnezzar did here in this particular instance. And no king has been vested with such power in the history of mankind as was Nebuchadnezzar. So much of the control over the world and over the lives of people, that's why he had so much control over the world and over the lives of people. But that's why in the interpretation of a dream, which we'll go through here, he's told your kingdom will be replaced by an inferior kingdom, not inferior as far as strength, but the Medo-Persian Empire was powerful and very wealthy. But as far as the control by the king, he was going to have much less power. And he would be subject to the laws of the land, where Nebuchadnezzar was the law himself. So he was furious, and he ordered the execution of all these men. And when Arioch, verse 14, when Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. And I think that's important, an important lesson in our own lives. Daniel spoke with him with wisdom and tact. And today, you can't have a conversation with people, because if you say the opposite of what that other person says, then it becomes an argument. But Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact, and he asked the king's officer, "Why did the king issue such a harsh decree?" Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went in to the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. So Daniel goes into the king and says, look, give me a chance to interpret this. You haven't given us a chance. Give us the chance to interpret it. The king was still wanting them to tell him what the dream was and then interpret it. So then Daniel returned to the house and explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or Meshach and Abednego, on them, and he urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So Daniel went to the king and he said, look, give me a little time. I'll come tell you what the dream was. I'll tell you what the interpretation was. So then what does he and his friends do? They said, hey, it's time to sit down and pray about this. This is serious, and we've got to get some information, and our necks are literally on the line for this. So, lesson to be learned here, take your troubles to God in prayer. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision, and then Daniel praised the God of heaven. Now, I think it's important to the story and for us to know that Daniel at this time was probably around 19 or 20 years of age. And he was probably around maybe 15 or 16 when he was carried into Babylon. So he was just a very young man, but he was a young man who was purposed in his heart and wasn't going to defile himself with the king's meat, as we read last week or a couple weeks ago. And it shows that somewhere along the line, Daniel had excellent training in the ways of God and in the things of God, that even by the age of 16, it was deeply embedded in him. And he carried that away into Babylon. What he had been raised with was carried away with him into Babylon, where the spiritual influences that he had were still with him, and he were still maintaining a very high integrity of spiritual matters. So to realize that even as a very young man, he had such high principles and high ideals, the depth of his spiritual character is expressed here after God revealed to him the dream of the interpretation. And as we read Daniel's response to God, and realize that he's just a young man in a far foreign country, but he shows the depth of spiritual character. And, I get encouraged with this. I get encouraged with the young men that we have in our church, that they have the spiritual character that they have in their lives, and that they are standing on their principles in everything that they're doing. In verse 20, praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we ask of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. So here they've slept, they prayed, they slept, God gave them the vision, and now they're giving God the glory for what he has given to them in interpreting the dream. And this to me is just a real great expression, the verses we just read, a real great expression of praise and thanksgiving to God, which again shows the depth of Daniel's spiritual character as such a young man. And I think a lot of time, we may think, well, he's too young to really have much of a spiritual maturity or to be able to share so much in spiritual things. But, as I look at Daniel and we look at Jeremiah, they started their ministry very young and early, and they had a very deep understanding of God and the spiritual understandings. So then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, "Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him." Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, "I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means." The king asked Daniel, who is also Belteshazzar, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" Daniel replied, and this is important, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in the days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in bed are these." So now, first, let's make note that Daniel does not take personal credit for interpreting the dream. The king says, "I understand you can make known to me the dream and the interpretation." And Daniel says, "Look, there's not any wise man, magician, or whatever that can do that, but there is a God in heaven who reveals these things." And he gives God the credit for the interpretation, for the understanding of the dream. And I think that's something important, and I think it's something that we all, as we become involved in the work of the Lord, that it's important to note this particular aspect of Daniel, that he was not about to take credit for what God had done. He immediately points to God as the source, and he gives credit to God. He does not let the king give him credit or give him honor, but he points the king to God. There's a God in heaven who reveals these things, and he has made note. Next, second, I want to make note that the dream is for the latter days. So it's a dream that has prophetic significance on this. The things are going to come to pass here on earth. Daniel 2, verse 30, "But as for me," so here again, notice he's not taking credit. "As for me, the mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind." So Daniel's saying, "Look, king, God didn't do this for me because I'm something special or because I have anything over anybody else. He's not trying to exalt himself at all in this. He only seeks to exalt God." And which reminds me of whatever we do in word or in deed, do all in the name of the Lord. So lesson, give God the glory. So now he tells the king what he dreamed, but notice what he says. "Your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance." So he says, you saw this great image, awesome, it was bright. "The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. And while you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. So this was the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had that troubled him. This is the dream, Daniel said, and we're going to tell you, king, the interpretation of this. Thou, king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and have made thee ruler over them, for thou art this head of gold. Now, Karen's up here fidgeting a little bit because she knows I skipped a verse. Verse 29. And so I'm going to go back to it. And he said, as your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. So before Nebuchadnezzar went to sleep, Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, you are wondering in your mind, what's going to happen to the world? What does the future hold? And so this dream pertains to the future. God is in this dream giving him history in advance as he lays out the kingdoms that would rule over the earth. The first world governing empire, of course, the Babylonian Empire, which is the head of gold. So verse 39, after you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. And next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Notice that these are all world-dominating empires, bearing rule over the earth. And finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. And just as you saw the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. So that is that there would not be a monarchy, but there would be some sort of democracy kind of thing, a confederacy of states maybe, but not a strong dictatorship or monarchy. You saw the iron mixed with the miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. And then just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. So this is the great image, the head of gold representing the Babylonian Empire, the first world dominating empire, and it was going to be replaced by an inferior empire. The arms and the chest of silver are the Medo-Persian Empire, which was to be replaced by the brass stomach, or the Macedonian Empire, which was then going to be supplanted by legs of iron, the Roman Empire. But then he saw the feet of iron and clay with 10 toes, weaker than the iron because you have a mixture of iron and clay. Not a strong monarchy, but more of a confederacy, yet it was related to the Roman Empire because it's part iron. So because of this, and as we get a little bit further in later on in Daniel chapter 7 and 8, Daniel declares that the second empire will be the Medo-Persian, the third will be the Macedonian, and then of course we know from history that the fourth Roman is the Roman Empire. Now this is where, in full disclosure, I get a little bit confused, and I don't really want to confuse you, so I probably shouldn't even go down this path, and maybe some of you would be able to straighten me out. Maybe Brother Kaywood's not here tonight, but in some of the commentaries that I was looking at and reviewing, I find it interesting that Bible scholars for years, and I'm talking back in the 20s, have been talking about the confederacy of European unions, of European nations that would join together, that would become the final world governing empire. And you know, since the Roman Empire, there's not been another world governing empire. Hitler, of course, his dream was to become a world ruler, and he sought to establish a world governing empire through the super race. But he never accomplished this dream, praise God. And it's well known that the goal of communism is to develop a world dominating empire. And the communists will not fulfill their dreams either, but they're making great inroads in it. They're even making great inroads into our nation here. So, you know, you look at what our nation is going through. But Bible scholars, and even in books, as I said, written back in the 20s and the 30s, predicted that there would be an arise in Europe and a confederacy of 10 nations who would link themselves together with treaties. And the European Union comes to mind when I was reading about this. And that the 10-nation federation in Europe would become the final world dominating empire. Because the 10 toes are part iron, the nations that become or join together would be related to the Roman Empire, or the nations that were involved in the Roman Empire. But because there's a mixture of clay, so you would have a democracy among them, the nations would have equal parts, and it wouldn't be one nation overall. So, you know, the Bible scholars have been watching Europe for the development of this 10-nation European community. And in 1981, Greece signed the treaty and became officially the 10th nation of the European community. But we all know, as we listen to the news now, the European Union is having its own issues, and it's beginning to fall apart. So the Bible scholars that were talking about back at that time, it's not true. But like I said, the Lord said, the dream is certain and the interpretation is sure. And it's followed a lot of the sequences that have been predicted. And it's significant that since the Roman Empire, you haven't had a world governing empire. But, and I emphasize but, my belief is these pagan empires are human in their origin, temporary in their nature, and will be overcome by their own weakness. God has set up a kingdom which is divine in its origin, eternal in its nature, and it is unconquerable. And that kingdom is the kingdom of God today, established after the resurrection of Jesus. It has endured the attacks of Satan and the changes and the difficulty of time. So, enough of the sidebar. Let's get back to Daniel, verse 46. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. And the king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery. Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court. So Daniel talked to the king about his friends, got them in important position, so God takes care of us. So, some lessons from chapter 2. We have to have faith in God's wisdom and his power. And here, Daniel showed immense faith in God's ability to reveal mysteries when he requested time from the king to interpret the dream. He didn't rely on his own understanding, but turned to God in prayer. And we as Christians need to lean on God's wisdom, especially in situations beyond our own understanding. and in times of uncertainty. Like Daniel, we need to seek God's guidance through prayer and trust in his divine wisdom. Daniel was humble. He had a lot of humility, and despite his ability to interpret the dream, Daniel did not take credit for himself. He humbly acknowledged that the wisdom and the power came from God. And that teaches us as Christians that we too need to be humble in our talents and our achievements. God gives us our talents. God gives us our abilities. And we should always recognize and testify that our gifts are from God, and we use them to serve his purpose and to glorify him. Daniel and his friends earnestly sought God's mercy in prayer to reveal the dream's meaning, which demonstrates their dependence on God for knowledge and wisdom. And we need to be reminded of the power and importance of prayer. In moments of need, we need to gather in prayer. We need to seek God's help and his intervention. Daniel approached the king's guard and the king himself with tact and wisdom. Remember in verse 14. He was respectful and diplomatic, even though it was a life-threatening situation. So that teaches us the importance of wisdom and tact in dealing with authorities. Respect, politeness, discernment are very crucial, especially when we're faced with difficult situations. And the courage to stand for God's truth. Daniel boldly interpreted the king's dream, conveying not only the immediate meaning, but also the prophecy about God's eternal kingdom. He stood firm in his faith and conveyed God's truth regardless of the potential consequences. And so we, as Christians, need to be encouraged to stand firm in our faith, to boldly proclaim God's truth. And like Daniel, we should fearlessly bear witness to God, to God's sovereignty and his plan, even when we are in the face of opposition or uncertainty. So Daniel chapter 2 gives us the first glimpse of God's kingdom to come. And we have the lessons of faith, humility, prayer, wisdom, and courage. And with those lessons, we as Christians can navigate the complexities of life that we have, uphold our own faith, and be a light to those around us. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank thee for this day, and Father, we're so thankful for